I'm the bad guy. I'm the, I'm the bad.
Hi everyone, and welcome back to Across the Gridiron. I'm Matt, and as always, I'm joined by the man, the myth, the legend, Eddie Equo, as we dissect a pivotal weekend of NFL action, which saw two potential Super Bowl matchups, as well as many teams all but confirming their place in the postseason showdown that is the playoffs. Eddie, just quickly, what caught your eye this weekend?
First of all, I love that intro. So let's do more of that.
That's the last nice thing I'll say about you, Eddie.
But listen, right? If you told me at the start of the season that we will see the Lions and the Bills in a 48-42 shootout, that looked like something straight out of Madden, I would have just been laughing. But Josh Allen might have just written his MVP acceptance speech with that performance. But you know what stuck with me more, man? The Dolphins. I don't know if it's the Florida heat or the playoff pressure, but they folded like a bad poker hand. That was their must-win game, and they rolled a pair of twos. meanwhile, Philly's out here looking like a team that knows exactly who they're doing. Like I say, no flash, just dominance. They've embraced their identity. It's like watching a well-oiled machine. And okay, shout out to the Rams for sneaking into that fourth seed, right? The NFC West race is looking like a family reunion where nobody likes each other.
Absolutely, mate. I think you summed it up pretty well there. But look, we will go through all the main talking points of last week. But before we do, let's just summarize what went down, what was in some of the key matches from last weekend. So, as Eddie was mentioning, in the first of two big matchups this weekend, Josh Allen could well have sealed the MVP for the year as he led the Buffalo Bills to an impressive 48-42 win over the Detroit Lions, who suffered their first defeat since week 2. The other leading NFC franchise fared better though, as the Philadelphia Eagles beat the Pittsburgh Steelers 27-13 in the Battle of Pennsylvania. So whilst the Steelers' playoff place may be certain, their third seed position could be pinched by the Baltimore Ravens, who took advantage of Pittsburgh's loss with a convincing 35-14 victory over a dejected, poor-looking New York Giants to go a single game behind the Steelers. Elsewhere in the AFC, as Eddie so nicely mentioned, the Texans clinched the AFC South division and their playoff place by beating the Miami Dolphins 2012, all but ending Miami's slim chance at the playoff place. The Denver Broncos beat the Indianapolis Colts 31-13 in a big playoff battle to more or less secure their place in the postseason as well. Whilst in the NFC, the Minnesota Vikings took advantage of the Lions' defeat by going level with a 12-2 record after beating the Chicago Bears and clinching their postseason participation. But the question is, as we'll talk about later, can they also threaten the top two seeds? Elsewhere in the NFC, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, the Green Bay Packers and the Washington Commanders all strengthened their playoff ambitions with victories over the weekend, whilst the LA Rams took the place of the Seattle Seahawks as the fourth seed in the NFC as they beat the San Francisco 49ers on Thursday Night Football. But there's surely more twists and turns left yet in that division. And finally, it says here that the Carolina Panthers lost, but I ran out of notes, so I couldn't tell you who actually beat them. And that was week 15. Right, so let's start off with the big game of the week. We've already mentioned it twice. It was the Buffalo Bills and the Detroit Lions. Now, this was an incredible match as the Bills ran out 48-42 victory over this absolute backcrap crazy game. But, Eddie, let's once again start with Josh Allen. 362 passing yards, 2 touchdowns, 68 yards off 11 runs. I mean, that's surely the MVP for him. Sewed up. He was simply sensational, wasn't he, Eddie?
He was sensational, man. And listen, this man didn't just lock up the MVP. He threw away the key and told everyone, find your way in. Like, look, when you put up 6 touchdowns in a must-win game. Because let's not kid ourselves, right? They had a stinker, right? The last game, right? They lost the last game. I mean, he played well, but they lost. And at this point in time, it's wins and losses, right? Shannon Sharp used to say that if you come to my restaurant, I only serve 2 things on my menu: wins and losses. Which one do you want to order? And, listen, right? It was a team that hadn't lost, since week 4, right? So you're sending a message there. You're saying this wasn't just a win. This was I'm the best player on the court kind of thing. It's like, like when you're like playing football and you have that guy who's like a very good midfielder and it's like, always on the ball, and then he comes late. And then as soon as he comes in, everyone is like relaxed because they know that, okay, he's got it. He's literally got it. So this is how Josh Allen was just saying, hey, listen, you guys, I've got this MVP. No one's going to catch me now. I think, you had the likes of Saquon Barkley floating with it. Some people talked about Jared Goff, and Lamar. But I mean, I know Lamar, did well, and we'll probably touch on this game as well. But I think, Josh Allen has been solid, not flashy, but solid. He's got a highlight reel, definitely the MVP in my book.
No, absolutely. I think it's, I think it's getting increasingly difficult to argue that point. I mean, I think it was in the UK TV coverage, Jason Bell, former player, said it best. It was just like him it was like being on the schoolyard, right? Yeah. And then he's just the best player on the schoolyard. Nobody could touch him, right? Yeah. He's playing with all these other little kids around him, absolutely bossing them. And it was everything. It was the throws. It was the cross the field, it was cross field throws. It was the way he used his legs, just incredibly smart play. And, if you get down to the playoffs, if you get in a playoff race and you're against a team, say something like that, they may well come up against Kansas City again.
Yeah.
And you're in a shootout against Mahomes.
Yeah.
You have to know that every time you get the ball, you're going to score. And that's exactly what these guys look like at the moment. Yeah. And I mean, multiple 40+ games against the Lions are a very aggressive, very brave side. Yeah. I mean, you saw that with the onside kick they tried twice. Certainly when they did it really early with 12 minutes left in the fourth quarter, but they did what they needed to do. They went up early they took 3-score lead, and they just never looked, the Lions just could not get back into it.
They couldn't. And, Dan Campbell has done this a few times. And guys, if you don't know this, last season, right, one of the things, that got the Lions out of the playoffs and the run to the Super Bowl was Dan Campbell went, on 4th down, instead of taking the field goal, he went for it. Now, he's notorious doing this. He did that against the Cowboys last season, if you remember, and the Cowboys won the game. And I know he wants to kind of like say, I'm the guy, I trust my players. But sometimes when you're playing a game, you have to understand who's on the other side of the pitch. In boxing, they say styles make fights. And when you've got Josh Allen, on the other side, you cannot afford to be leaving points in the field. Got to take points, whether it's 3 or 6 or 7, got to take them every time you get to the red zone. And for me, that's one thing I think that the Lions have to be careful about because, they already now, if the Lions have got 17 starters on IR, right? They're already battling with injuries. So the games are not just going to be like the way it was in the first 5 weeks of the season where they're just going to steamroll everyone. I think what we saw, against the Bills is going to be what you're going to see going forward in terms of close games, everyone trading points, and you've got to take every single point off the table. So for me, I think the Lions lost it, in that game by, just not playing winning football.
Yeah. I mean, there's playing aggressive and there's playing smart. I mean, you look at some of the stats with Jared Goff. I mean, you look at the stats, very good game, 495 yards, 5 touchdowns, 0 interceptions. That is very impressive numbers. I think the risk for the Lions at the moment, you mentioned the injuries will catch up with you. the race in the NFC, which we'll touch on later, certainly for the playoffs, is incredibly tight. So they're still the first seed at the moment, and that's because of their divisional record.
Yeah.
Compared to the Vikings and compared to the Eagles. But if they lose another game, they could find themselves third seed.
Yeah.
And they could find themselves actually playing an extra game. Now, really, what you want to be doing in this situation is trying to confirm that first seed, that second seed, so you get that bye week, you get that week off, you get some time, get some players sometimes to time to recover. It's gonna be tough. Now, look, you can play the Bills, you can lose to the Bills. The Bills are an exceptional team. Josh Allen's an exceptional quarterback. Where do you think this defeat leaves the Lions, though, going into playoffs? We know where the Bills are going to. We know where to lead the Bills. They are one of the best teams in the AFC in all of football at the moment. You know they could well get to divisional, and they'll probably lose to Kansas City Chiefs. That's just the way it goes. But where do you think this leaves the Lions in the NFC going into the playoffs?
I think it leaves them looking over their shoulder. They are walking down a dark alley, and they're not quite sure what's on the other end. Because the NFC race right now has got three genuine teams that can get that number one spot. The Vikings can do it. In fact, the Vikings win their next three games, they're going to get the number one spot. So they're not to be taken lightly. And they've got winnable games, right? The Vikings have definitely got winnable games. So I think the Lions right now cannot afford a slip off. They have got to lock this thing down. They've got the Eagles breathing down their neck, who look, really, really incredible. We're going to touch on the Eagles as well. But for me, I think the Lions, they've lost a lot of key players. We just had David Montgomery, he's out for the season as well. They lost Aiden Hutchinson, a while ago. They're literally dropping like flies, and this is the game of attrition, right? It's going to catch up with them. So I think the Lions right now will be thinking, can we get healthy, and can we get healthy quick?
No, absolutely. I think it's the running in the NFC especially is going to be particularly exciting. Certainly more exciting in the AFC anyway. But you mentioned it, so let's move on now to the Philadelphia Eagles and their victory in a Battle of Pennsylvania against the Pittsburgh Steelers. They came out 27-13 in this game. This was another potential Super Bowl matchup, with two of the top three seeds in both the NFC and the AFC. Now, last week, Eddie, about the Eagles particularly, moment, we discussed some of the frustrations that some of the Eagles wide receivers displayed post-game in their victory last week, really calling out their quarterback Jalen Hurts, when they said that their main issue in the game was passing. Right. We said, and you've said it yourself earlier, that the Eagles are a team who know exactly who they are and where they are. You've got Saquon Barkley is probably one of the most leading offenses in the entire of NFL at the moment. Right now, roll on a week and everything flips on its head. Barkley gets knocked about, got roughed up earlier on in the game, and he only picked up 65 yards, which therefore means that the Eagles have to change their game. Hurts throws for 290 yards, 2 touchdowns with both Brown and Smith, two of the guys who were some of the ringleaders in the frustration last week, both getting 100 yards and a touchdown each, and they now move to 10 victories in a row. So, this was a good victory for Eagles. It certainly showed they have a different way of winning. Okay, what did you make of this one?
I like a good old fashioned, show off, right? Because that's what the Eagles did, right? The Eagles, showed up on the prom. I was like, I've got a better girlfriend than you have. I'm rolling in, with my limousine. You guys are rolling with your Ford Fiesta. Nothing against Ford Fiesta, but you're
talking from experience, aren't you, Eddie? Who hurt you? I know. Did he used to have a Ford Fiesta? Is that what it is? And someone's rolled up and made you look cheap.
It's still raw.
Still raw. I'm sorry about that, mate. I didn't mean to put you down like that.
It's still raw, but listen, the Eagles are showing off that. Say, listen, if you want to play it on the ground, we can play it on the ground. If you want to take it to the skies, we can take it to the skies. And AJ Brown, Smitty as well. with Jalen Hurts. It was more like, are you guys not entertained? Is this what you guys were looking for, kind of thing?
You're not
Um,
entertained.
I mean, listen, right? The Eagles have got a balanced team. You've got to say they look very strong. They look good. You know, if they stick to their identity, and I say this all the time, especially with Ravens, right? You stick to your identity, you run the ball, lean on your defense, you should be fine. And every now and then you get your wide receivers involved. Now, would they always have games where each of their wide receivers go 100 yards? Maybe not. But you want to keep the defense guessing, right? If they load up the box, meaning that they bring lots of people to the scrimmage, you want to be able to allow your AJ Brown to go one-on-one on the cornerbacks. And there's not a lot of cornerbacks that will go one-on-one on AJ Brown. He will just skin you.
Mhm.
So for me, I think the Eagles are looking very comfortable, right? And they just need to worry about overconfidence. That's the only thing I'll say to them.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we said last week that this frustration, this almost this selfishness attitude with some of these ROCs, it could come back to haunt them. But I think you're right. I think this weekend show they've got different weapons, that if Barkley's not there, they've got other ways to hurt you. This is very much a team performance, and it will keep defenses guessing as we go into the playoffs. But let's look at the other team across the gridiron there, which was obviously the Pittsburgh Steelers. Now, where do you think? How do you think this impacts them? I think that one of the biggest takeaways, obviously, they lost a game, they've been a great run of form, but obviously TJ Watt goes down. Huge player for them. They are again. I think there's some positive noises saying he should be available for the match against the Ravens next week. But if he isn't, that's a huge loss for them. He's one of the leading defensive players in the league.
Yeah, it's huge, huge. You can't get any bigger than TJ Watt, defensive player of the year. He single-handedly can win a game, on his
Mhm.
own. You know that he's that kind of player. I don't know if it changes my opinion about the Steelers, right? They didn't get it done this week. But I mean, if you're gonna run for 9 yards, I think Justin Field ran for 8 yards. They had no running game at all, in that game. And the Steelers is all about play good defense, run the ball. Remember that game against the Ravens that they won it by kicking field goals.
Mhm.
The defense has to come up top. But listen, I think they got the game plan wrong. I trust Mike Tomlin to get it right. So I don't know if I am necessarily worried about them. I will still think that they're a dark horse,
Mhm.
going into the playoffs, the team that you don't want to meet. Because like we said, like if TJ Watts is playing very well, you've got problems. So listen, they take a loss. It's difficult to go undefeated, and especially when you play a team that's outside of your division, that's
Mhm.
even more difficult. Outside your conference, even more difficult. Because teams prepare for the teams in their division. So I wouldn't worry too much of the Steelers. I think the Steelers will be fine.
Yeah, no, I mean, look, they've they've clinched their playoff place. They've won the division. What we've, as I said in the intro, we might see the Baltimore Ravens potentially sneak up and take that third place off them. But to me, they've certainly proven themselves to be the third best team in AFC so far this season. The results don't lie, but what they're going to want to do, they want to try and maintain that third seed.
Yeah.
Right. So I think that's a key thing. But let's move on now to the third and final game. We're going to focus on a little bit more detail. And again, in the AFC, so let's focus on the Houston Texans, who clinched their second consecutive AFC South division with their victory over their 2012 victory over the Miami Dolphins. But look, I think we need to say is before we go through this game and discuss it in more detail, I think we need to say that our thoughts with Grant. Miami Dolphins wide receiver Grant Dubos and with his friends and family at the moment. So for those who haven't seen it, the wide receiver suffered a pretty serious and very sort of scary looking head injury during the game. The game was stopped. When that kind of stuff happens, it's incredibly scary. The players were making prayer circles around him, and as a fan, you're there just wondering what happened. And he's remained in hospital in Houston, and he didn't travel back with the team. Now, obviously, the latest is that the Dolphins have had positive feedback, which is great. But on behalf of everybody from across the gridiron, we just want to wish Dubas a speedy recovery. And don't want to speak for you, Eddie. So I don't know if you want to say anything else on that.
No, absolutely. My thoughts and prayers go to him and his family. And we see it a lot of times in our football over here. I think one that comes to mind is Christian Eriksen. When he went down during the Euros, and then of course everyone kind of rallied around, and the medical people swung into action. And that's the one thing we've got to say as well, to the medical people that come in and they really avoid what could potentially be something more disastrous. So we've got to say some high praise, for those medical guys too as well. But yeah, our thoughts and prayers, to him and the family, and also to the Miami Dolphins.
No, absolutely. You're absolutely 100% right on the medical staff. They were the real MVPs of that game yesterday. Just shows how important they are. So yeah, look, let's move on to the game itself then. And look, this just was not a pretty game for the Miami Dolphins, was it, Eddie? The offense just did not show up, especially in the second half. The defense did. They sacked CJ Stroud, the Texans QB. They sacked him 4 times. But the offense just had an off day. 3 interceptions for Tua, despite only having 1 of his previous 7 games. And for me, that's their playoff hopes done for the season. There's no way for them to come back. The big question for me leading into next season is we've seen this Dolphins team year after year after year just struggle to beat the big teams. This year they only have 1 win against a team with a winning record this season, and they just seem brittle to me. Now, I know you took great privilege in highlighting this shower, shall we say, at the beginning of the show. But what's your thoughts on the Dolphins?
Listen, I was riding with the Dolphins. I was swimming with the Dolphins. I was having a nice time. We're off the tour train now.
It's been derailed. It's been derailed.
I don't know. This was a painful loss, I have to say. I think they're done. They're not just done, but they're burnt to a crisp. You can stick a fork in the Miami Dolphins right now, because they had one job. Beat the Texans and keep your playoffs hopes alive. And sometimes you have these things with teams where they just can't seem to get over the hump. Tell me about it. I know I'm going to insert the Dallas Cowboys here, because, they're just very typical. I don't know why we're supporting teams that have this sort of pains, right? Because the Cowboys, brilliant, in the regular season, terrible in the postseason. And the Dolphins, beat everyone else, but struggle against big things. And you wonder whether it's a psychological thing, right? You bring it back to our football, and, when the big games come, how people always do this, mini league table and say, how many games have you won against the big teams? Whether you're an Arsenal or you're Manchester United or Manchester City, those games are important, not just because of the points, but because of the mentality and the psychology that happens when you win these games. I think it just feeds into the confidence for the next one. And when you keep losing them, you're almost beaten before you get on the pitch, because, sometimes you're thinking, can we actually get it done? And until you get it done, you don't know, right? And you look at the Kansas City Chiefs, and that's one of the things that, makes them stand out, from other teams, because they've done this so many times. They could be down by double digits, in the 4th quarter, but everyone is calm. Everyone is calm. And it was a horrible game for the Dolphins to lay an egg. Dolphins do lay eggs, but maybe they don't lay eggs. Do the Dolphins lay eggs? I think they give birth, to other baby dolphins. But they had a bad game. It was a bad game, for all your Avengers not to show up. And Tua's got to take some blame, here. At some point, you have to stop being potential and start being production, right?
Yeah.
And now he's the former. It hurts to say, but he is looking like the former. He's got to start taking these games and leading his team to victory.
Yeah, I mean, look, the Dolphins. I think this is just a season you've kind of got to write off. I think they just gave themselves too much to do. You know, if you look since Tua's come back, they've got a winning record since he's come back. And as I said last week, and I stand by this, you have Tua in that team all season, and the Dolphins are a winning side. Yeah, over the course of the season. But we've said this before. Parcells has said you are your record, and their record is a losing side, and that goes, you know, for the production just wasn't there when Tua wasn't playing, when he was on the shelf. But they had a bad game, and I think they had to go lights out pretty much when Tua came back to give them a shot. They maybe were allowed one dip, and they had that dip against the Packers because the Dolphins, we don't like playing in cold. And it was every game became must win, and I think after a while that pressure would get to you. It almost got to them against the Jets last week. They got that overtime victory in the clutch last week, and I just think they came up against a good football side in the Texans, whose defense, you know, Tua played poorly, the offense played poorly, and it's not just Tua, it's the whole offense, but the Texans showed up. Defensively, they showed up and they won, and they deserved the win. But let's take it off Miami and just quickly touch on Houston. Obviously, that's them clinching their divisional title again. Chances are, obviously, they're going to be the fourth seed in the AFC playoff race. How far do you see them going?
I still think that, you know, they're a young team, right? You know, they've done very well, and I don't think, you know, the Texans are going to be judged, you know, this season if they don't get to the Super Bowl. You know, I think when you have a quarterback that's in the second year, and there are very few quarterbacks that have gone to the Super Bowl in their second year. You know, famous Russell Wilson did that in the second year, you know, got to the Super Bowl and won. But it's very hard to do, which is why a lot of teams, you know, quarterbacks don't do that. So you've got a young coach, you know, you've got, you know, a young quarterback. You lost, you know, Stephon Diggs, you know, pretty early on in the season, so he wasn't able to contribute. You know, you've got, you know, players that are really, really just. I think right now, they are playing above what is expected of them. Right, I think they're overachieving. So I think you get into the playoffs. If you get a win, you know, that's great. You know, and I think you consider that as a success, you know, the Texans. I don't see them troubling, you know, the likes of, you know, Lamar, you know, the Ravens, the Steelers, or the Chiefs. So I think, you know, in that AFC, you're looking at the Chiefs, you're looking at the Ravens, you're looking at the Steelers, you know, in that order, you know, potentially.
Or the Bills.
Yeah, or the Bills, right? You know, don't forget the Bills. Actually, I would say, let me reverse the order. I'll say Chiefs, Bills, Ravens, and Steelers. And then you've got, you know, the Texans coming just below that pack. So they've got to run a gauntlet, you know, to be able to do something in the playoff.
Hey, well said. It's the good news is CJ Stroud's second year wins the division 2 years in a row. So that's obviously positive. But yeah, look, I think that's enough for part one. So we will be back in part two, where we will go through our regular feature of touchdown or turnover. We will see you on the other side.